This is the Voice of Bold Business, and I am your host, Jessica Dewell. You are listening to Program 22, Startup Culture in Established Businesses. Organizational culture is always changing. It's reinforced or shifted with every single action of every single leader within our company. While it starts with the mission and values, it's built upon and evolves with our behaviors and our actions. When times are tough, sales are stagnant, maybe they're even declining, or there's high turnover, first we look outside to find if there are changes that would be affecting us. And it's easy to look far and look wide because it's never our fault the problems exist, at least not at first, and maybe not at the second, and maybe not at the third. Even then, we say, well, it's just the way things are. That's when it's time to challenge our assumptions and go, well, even if that's how things are, is that how we want them to be? And it's from this place that if we're not careful, the disruption of other companies and the advancements of other companies will catch us and take over. And we don't want to be irrelevant. We don't want to become left in the dust to decline and die a slow death as a business. What if we acknowledged our current industry trends, declining trends within our organization, as something that we can actually influence? By evaluating what's behind the trends, and we go back to the beginning, the solution that's provided, the answer to the customer's problems, and maybe the fact that it's through our actions that we're in the place that we're at at first, right now, and it's up to us to decide to change. How we live the values of the organization plays a part. We as leaders set the boundaries that our teams work within. Startup culture is appealing, it's new, and it's fresh, and it's different. Today, Tanya, Bourque, and I are going to talk about the startup culture elements that can be used in established organizations right after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Tanya, I am so glad to have you back at the Voice of Bold Business Radio.
Glad to be back.
And for those of you who get to know us a little bit more, sometimes all we do is laugh and breathe. And that's all that'll happen. Because in the end, what do we really have control over? Our own actions, right? Our own actions. I tell you what. So we're thinking about startup culture today, and I know you are in the middle of a startup. And so from your perspective at the beginnings, and I shouldn't even say the beginnings, but the early stages of business, where do you see culture fitting into your business, Tanya?
It's in places that I didn't even think that it would be. Good example is with our clients. Our culture has to match their culture in order for us to be effective business-wise. So a good example is I was recruiting for a client, another startup. It was a software client. Their culture ideas clashed with ours in the sense that we figured out that it wasn't a good match. Communication style difference. They were very big into very blunt communication. There's this concept where you don't have to be polite, but you have to be kind. Kind of figuring it out, we were recruiting candidates for this client. As candidates were interviewing, I felt that the recruiters were rude. I felt that hiring managers were a little bit too much and over the top. And as I started to examine my culture, the culture of the norm, there's cultures out there that just don't match with yours.
We want to create opposites. We want people to go, I'm in this, or I'm not in this. We want people to go, I work like this, or I don't work like this. And that is part of positioning in the culture. I'm curious, at what point in time did you recognize that there was an incompatibility?
When it was way too late.
Okay.
When it was way too late. And we were so deep into it, and we had invested so many hours and even lost revenue over it.
We're going to come back to that because I think that's an important thing about the investment and the perception of investment. And I want to talk a little bit about values. I'm going to extrapolate what you said, and I want you to jump in if I get it wrong. Articulating a set of values in the culture, the way we do business, is key when we're going into business in a strategic partnership with another organization. whether that be a paying client, whether that be a one-time client, whether that be a long-term client. It is necessary to be able to articulate. Looking back at that, did that experience change how you are articulating the values and the culture within your organization?
I'm realizing that we have to kind of emulate what our clients are doing as far as culture, communication style, and we have to make sure that we're okay with it. I was finding that I really wasn't okay with that one particular client. I'm an older millennial, and there are younger millennials with a different communication style than mine. And I hate to talk about it that way. I hate the terms that have come up.
You don't like being classified by your age?
Not at all, because I'm completely different. And there's a lot of us that are just completely different. We more resemble the generation before.
So now how close are you to the cusp? Because I'm in the cusp. Depending on the reports you look, some of them say I'm a millennial and some of them say I'm Generation X. So I'm literally in the cusp of that range.
What's the age?
77, born in 77 to like 81.
My husband is on the cusp. I'm not.
You are not. You are actually in the millennial group. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Quote unquote in the millennial group, but towards the beginning of that. Because I also have millennial characteristics and I also have Gen X characteristics.
Yeah. So it's a lot of how I was trained. You know, I went to a formal business school. I was trained in business etiquette. I had professors and teachers and mentors previously, not recently, that were very old-fashioned, proper etiquette. You talk to people a certain way, you delegate responsibilities a certain way, and it's old school, but it's worked for the last 300 years.
And this is the difference. I actually think calling it old school is neat because we can challenge those assumptions and recognize that it still works. So it's a little bit more classic or timeless. For people who know me, classic is one of my values, is the simpler it is and the more timeless that it can be, it's going to be right in all times. And I think you're right. There are business practices that do well under that scrutiny and are still holding up. We could probably name 5 or 6 off the top of our heads that don't work well anymore because we've made improvements and we've done a lot of things that way. We were talking about being able to articulate our culture through our values and our mission and our vision. We are in a world here where we're doing more with less. Every business owner, every business leader is expected to do more with less, which means we're wearing multiple hats. We're expanding our skill sets regardless of where we are in our skills. There's this pressure involved there. And when we are wearing multiple hats, it becomes even more critical that we're able to articulate those vision, mission, and values. You may be experiencing this too, because I actually went through this recently. I am preparing for the next growth stage in Red Direction. And so I sat down and I'm like, what are the hats that I am wearing? What are the hats that each of my team members are wearing? And does it make sense with this next set of growth to be able to keep it the way that it is? Or do I need to split them up? And I have to tell you, the first person I approached, I said, hey, we're getting ready for some growth. Here's what's going on. I want to document everything that you're doing because we're probably going to split up what you're doing so you can continue to handle the workload. And I got met with a crazy response. And I walked away going, what just happened? What just happened? And then it occurred to me like 24 hours later, right? This is one of the times I wake up in the middle of the night from some dream that has nothing to do with what I remember when I wake up. But when I woke up, and no, Danny Glover was not there in this situation. Nope, Danny Glover was not there. He probably would have had a good response anyway. But I woke up and I said, oh, I have not done a very good job articulating where we're going. My values are understood for Red Direction. The values of Red Direction are understood. The person understands and owns and wants to be all in so much that I think that they think that I don't like the work that they're doing, which is completely incorrect. So
or you're planning on terminating them.
Exactly. So there's this fear that cropped up that prevented a productive conversation. So I went back and I said, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with you again. And I started out and I laid out the plan. And I said, this is what's happening. And this is what I see happening. There's going to be a point in time you will end up in burnout if I don't think about you right now. And here's what you're doing. And here's what you're doing. And here's what you're doing. And I need to understand all of those things and the conversation went on and it became better. And I'm thinking behind the scenes to myself, How many times do we forget to get it out of our head and tell the other person what we're actually thinking before we have that conversation? Because when we wear multiple hats, especially in a startup culture, we've got people who are invested. And when they feel like their investment is challenged or questioned, there's freak out when there really doesn't need to be any. And it's the quickest way to get out of a startup culture, a startup mindset.
Come from a more structured organization into the startup culture. There's a lot of fear of innovation, a lot of fear of change. I know for me, I came from a place that had a lot of resources, and then I opened up on my own, and I didn't have as many resources. I had to figure things out. I have actually a really interesting story someone had told me. At the World's Fair in 1893, there were fistfights in the street. There was a structure that they were putting up in Paris, and 50% of the people didn't like it, and the other 50% said that it was great. So people were fist fighting on the streets. Now here we are, over 100 years later. We can't imagine Paris without it.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's the Eiffel Tower.
You're right. It's a world icon.
Yep.
You know, I'm going to go back to that concept of documenting roles, communicating what's going on, and understanding what each set of responsibilities that needs to be done is really important. A lot of people think of it for redundancy, or being able to, when somebody goes on vacation, somebody else's role can be covered, and we've got the steps to make that happen. And that's very important. Yet at the same point in time, without doing that, we also are not taking the time and the effort and putting some upfront think time into why this role exists and why we're trying to fill it in our company to deliver on our mission.
It's also important to document to see how that role has evolved over time. And then as you're becoming a more mature organization, you're coming up with an career path for your people. With having that documentation in hand, you're able to put that together. It's really hard to put that together from scratch.
It is. And the farther back you go, the more stuff that's in people's heads, the harder it is to get out, because we're also busy, for lack of a better term. We've got so many things going on. It's harder when we're in the middle of growth, or we're in the middle of change, or we're in the middle of something that is a little scary, you know, the rumblings of layoffs, or the rumblings of downsizing, or just the rumblings of somebody's asking me questions and I don't understand why I'm getting asked these questions. Whatever that is under the current can be an obstacle. And you were talking about innovation and the concept of the fear of innovation and the fear of change. And it's really important to just acknowledge fear exists. If we have these roles documented and we are using this evolution path that Tanya, you were just talking about, it allows us to make sure that every action we take is in alignment with our vision, mission, values, or it's not. And it becomes very clear how to show up to do the work in this organization and what clients can expect, the expectation experience that we're communicating out to clients.
And I feel that if you're not changing and not evolving to business needs, you're not going to be successful. A lot of times when I'm looking to hire someone, if you're hearing something like, to the sense that this is the way we've always done it, this is the way that it has been, it's not the type of person you want in your organization.
I'm going to say right, and that this is the way we've always done it probably comes from the fact that the way that it's always been done came out of a hardship, came out of a time of change. Then it became a little bit safe. Okay, we came out of this place of change. It became what worked. So this is what we're always going to do. All companies that have lasted out there, Southwest, we'll use Southwest Airlines for this. They have their mission and they want to get people to the places they want to go inexpensively, and they want people to have a good experience. So there's this element of cheerfulness and happiness around their employees, which radiates out into whoever is flying with Southwest.
I can tell you the last time I was on a Southwest flight, the flight attendants were so cheerful. They had you laughing and joking around, and you didn't feel like you were on another airline. So this is the one airline that doesn't have a first class.
And they're delivering on their mission. And that might be the way things are always done. Our outcome is to make people feel good and not feel like they're on an airplane and make everybody feel like they're in first class. That might be their goal. And of course, that's the way that it's always going to be done because that's their vision. That has nothing to do with Here's the marketing that we've done. This is the time we communicate that marketing. This is how we want to hire, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are subject to change. I think it depends on what they're saying is the way we've always done this.
From a technology standpoint, I'm trying a lot of new things that I haven't tried before. Within startups themselves, there's an ecosystem of people that help each other out. And that's something unique to big business. Everybody is after each other. Within startups, people are partnering up, people are coming together, people are solving problems together as one big community. So it's a lot different than what we've seen in the business world the last 20 years.
So if I'm looking at a larger organization, when they say they want to have an entrepreneurial spirit or they want intrapreneurs, is that just lip service? Or how does somebody in the organization know that they really want this entrepreneurship within a larger organization and they want these cross-functional teams or they want this unconventional grouping of people within the organization because of all of this talent to get together and solve problems?
My problem is it's not entrepreneurship because you work for someone. And also on top of that, you're not vested. You don't have shares in the company. You don't have equity. So it's not entrepreneurship.
But this concept of being able to take what that spirit is of people helping each other, of challenging the status quo, of their willingness to step out and be a little uncomfortable and go, what would it look like if? What if this? What if that? And seeing something through to the end. But that also doesn't fit into a typical larger organization where here is my role. This is what I do. This is how I'm going to advance. These are the expectations that I have. And it might get old after a while. And I'm wondering if as the world changes and we're going as fast as we can, that we have this idea of bringing entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship into a larger organization actually comes from a way to an organization to capitalize on the talent and the ideas that they already have in place instead of always looking out. So could they be dressing up that word to actually just make the most of what they already have?
There's still a lot of barriers, an extreme amount of barriers in larger corporations than there are in a startup. The degree separation between the CEO and the employee of a startup is much smaller than, say, a large corporation of 10,000 people.
And in the United States, 97% of all business here is small business, which is under 500 people, and or up to 500 people, I think, is the current definition of that. Even over 10. There's this concept of how do you make the most of what you already have? And within a larger organization, it's easy to overlook and always look out because that's what's new and different and fresh. Yet it's amazing when, I mean, it's almost, and I really hope I don't offend anybody when I say this, but it's like, do you remember when you were a kid and you used to pull all the cushions off the couch to hope change fell out and you could make a few pennies here or there because you found them in the sofa cushions? It's like low-hanging fruit is another phrase that I actually hate, but I think it fits here in the sense that with so much investment in people that a company is making to keep them around, to keep them engaged, it makes sense to figure out what else could they do? How else could they show up? What interests them? And offer an opportunity, because maybe it's through this idea of working within an organization to keep things fresh, to wear a different hat, to have a different impact is a good way to foster that. And then I'm thinking in a smaller organization, even if it's just 10 or 20 people, it goes back to how do I do more with less money? How do I do more with the same amount of time? How do I do more? And I wonder if that mindset needs to shift into what are the strengths of my people and how might we expand those people and leverage it. This is a place where we can challenge. And I'm using this word challenge, like I'm going to challenge you to a duel, like throw down the white glove, throw down that white glove. Making the most of what we have is looking at our assumptions. Where are we saying, here's how it's always been done in a process way, and taking that and going, does it still need to be that way? Does it still produce the results that we've seen in the past? And if the answers are no, what can we do about it? What else could we consider? Here's how it might fit or work today. So the end goal is the same, but how we get there is different.
Within different organizations, depending on how structured they are, there's more leeway to openly say, this is my new idea and this is what I want to do. This is what we should change about this idea and that idea and this process and tweak this. I guess it varies on what it is that you're changing to.
A company will come work with me and they're like, I've got to go find talent. I've got to attract talent and keep talent. And this is what I think they expect. And companies make the mistake of thinking that everybody wants a startup culture.
One of my friends had posted something where this lady writes, I don't care that you have a beer tower or a candy buffet in your office. I need a place that has good benefits and it's going to pay me well.
What does new talent expect? And when somebody says they're a startup, what is the stereotype that we're working with? Because we're going to call it what it is. We're judging a company by what they classify themselves as.
The startup culture came from Silicon Valley. So many of these software companies were coming into Silicon Valley and hiring engineers. While they all had really great salaries and terrific benefits, they had to do something a little bit extra to attract the engineers because of the demand. So that's when they came up with free massages and dogs in the office and candy buffet and all the food you can eat and dry cleaning and childcare and all the things that you could possibly want. It comes twofold. To give you an example, I've heard that Google engineers hardly leave Google to go home, because everything is there. So when you're hardly going home, you're working all the time.
The other aspect is, this is so fun, I could do this all the time. So when we were talking a little bit earlier, like the example that you brought up of the person who wants good benefits and to get paid well, does that automatically imply that they want to work 9 to 5 and clock in and out? I don't think so. I think they could be just as invested as these people who love what they do so much, and these extra perks just make it easier to have more fun and get more done with the time that they're choosing to put in. That's where it comes down to our actions, and that's where it comes down to what are the words that come out of the leader's mouth? What are the actions the leader does? And how do the difference of what they say and what they do, what are the differences there? What's another thing? So attracting startup talent, we've got all of these perks. We've got all of these things that we associate as part of our stereotype. But when we're an established business, we still might want that startup mentality. We want somebody who wants to come in and have ownership. We want somebody that come in and create. We want somebody that comes in and challenges.
Now when I'm talking to engineers about positions, they want to know about the project. What is it that we're doing good in the world? What problem are we solving? And they want all of these details. It's more than a job. It becomes a mission. It becomes a belief system, and it becomes a part of who you are. As human beings, and as of lately, we put so much of who we are into what we do as work. It's way too much of who we are.
It sounds like you think that's a bad thing.
I do, because I've seen people who've gotten laid off. It's almost like their whole world had ended.
Our work is tied up in our identity. But why is that? Because we feel like we're contributing? Or is it because we feel like we're necessary? And I think that there's two sides of that coin. Because if somebody's identity is wrapped up in what their role is, because they're actually contributing, they're going to find another job in no time. But if they're wrapped up in, I was necessary, how could they let me go? It's a whole different thing. It becomes a little bit of an ego, and it makes it a little harder because now there's an emotional barrier to being able to put our problem-solving skills and what we believe in our mission and how we can look at another company's mission and go, yes, this fits with my personal values.
I do think there's two sides to everything that we're looking at. I don't think work is the end-all be-all. I guess the point that I'm trying to make. I think that we're so wrapped up in what we do, it becomes the first conversation when you meet somebody. Oh, what do you do for a living? Is usually one of the first questions somebody asks you when they meet you. I think we really need to separate our skills from the role. I'll give you an example. Barack Obama leaves office. He no longer has that role. His term is over. He had taken some skills from his time as president into a new role, whatever he decides to do next. His life isn't over because he's no longer president.
Well, we can look to him as a role model for a couple of other things. He's the first president that actually takes time to sightsee in the places that he goes and really get to know the people and the culture of who we are interacting with as the United States and seeing all sides. And that's actually something that I think is really important too when we're talking about attracting talent or keeping talent and what the expectation is of something that is a startup, whether it's a startup mentality, which translates into one thing, or a startup organization, which could translate to another thing. But in the end, it's how do we live in a business when we want a startup mentality. That could mean, I want you to work on the cheap. Other times it could mean we want to move fast and grow and get results, so we're going to do whatever it takes. And for others, it means we're building this thing because we are making an impact in the world. Understanding what the driving results are behind the concept of startup and a startup mentality makes all the difference. So if I'm an established business, what could I do? I can look at the current company's vision, mission, and values, because those very rarely change. And then look at what's actually happening in the organization and find out if there's a gap there. And one way to be able to close that gap is going, okay, we got to drive business results somehow. So how can we do that? Oh, we need a startup mentality. Well, what does that mean to deliver our mission better? What does that mean to articulate, communicate, and live our values to the fullest? Because that way we're getting into other things like employee engagement and contributions and how people are recognized, and do the long hours pay off or do they not? If you're working the longest hours and you're the one that's never recognized, something is out of alignment with what's going on in the organization and what we think we were signing up for in the organization, and there's a conversation that could be had.
And I think those conversations are better sooner than later.
So what does startup culture mean, or what does startup mean within our existing business? How do we recognize everybody's contributions? And there's this great book that I'm reading right now called Own It. Meredith Elliott Powell wrote it, and it's about taking responsibility for ourselves and knowing that whatever we choose to take responsibility for, we can influence. It can work for us or against us. So it's easy to blame and it's easy to complain, but it's hard to show up and do the work. When we notice a discrepancy or we notice a difference, the easy way is to sit around and complain about it and grumble and let this thing fester emotionally. The hard thing is to go, I'm feeling this dissonance, I'm feeling this friction. What is it? Can I face it? How is it showing up and affecting my work? Who do I need to talk to open up a dialogue and see what the outcome can be? Can it be resolved here? Those are some really important questions when we're thinking about the contributions of people, making sure that what startup mentality means in our organization is effectively communicated, and all of our employees understand that as well. Working long hours could also be part of startup, but it doesn't have to be. Playing hard and working hard could be a startup part, but it doesn't have to be. For some people, work hard, play hard might just mean I'm all in. I am 100% here and I'm going to give what I have. I understand what my strengths are, and I understand that you, my peers, are going to help me develop those. For those of you that are just joining us, this is Program 22, Startup Culture in Established Businesses. We've been talking a lot about what startup means and what it takes to actually understand and communicate that effectively as a leader to our teams. One of the points that I know we wanted to cover was, how do we iterate and deliver on our mission to keep getting money in to keep a project going? That's part of bringing a startup mentality into an existing organization. Grabbing people to solve a problem together that would normally not work together. Figure out, does this thing have legs within an organization? Because what happens in an actual startup? People are looking for funding, they're looking to build teams, and they're looking for growth. All three could be happening in an established business, but also just the last two, team building and growth, could be happening in an existing business. So do you have any tips, Tanya, about how to deliver on the mission to get this money in?
You need to build an effective team and be able to project solid business plan with a revenue plan. It used to be that you would come up with this great idea and then try to go get funding. Now you have to prove that this idea works.
If you were to talk to my friend and colleague, Stephanie Sims, who also comes on the Voice of Bold Business sometimes, that's one of her biggest pet peeves. She helps businesses find out what money is best for them to continue to grow. There's a lot of things that say, hey, take this idea. Before you even have a prototype, before you even prove there's market share available, and go see if you can get money for it. Well, that's really cool. It is unsustainable.
And I'm in the middle of going out to venture capitalists and investors and talking to them about this. And when I first came out with my idea, I had only an idea. And people told me that you needed to come up with something a little bit better than that. I went out and spoke to a bunch of people in the industry, came back with some ideas on how I was going to market this, how I was going to build it, and come up with like even a prototype. Doing that in the way beginning saves you a lot of time and money.
You're describing think time. You have an idea. You're going to get feedback. You're building that idea. You're going out and getting feedback. You're plugging the holes that people see. You're getting something that's viable. And then through that, whoever's got the idea can come back and ask people, is this useful? Would you use this? What situations would you use this for? Is there value here to whatever this is? And finding the target market, I think, is really important in all of that. And is it big? Because if it's only 5 people, that's okay if it's $1 million product. But if it's not $1 million product, probably need more than 5 people in your market share. That adage, it takes money to make money, is so true. And the willingness to invest more than energy and more than resources is really important. You guys reading a blog post about working for free, and this concept of startups that ask people to work for free are totally missing the point, because nothing is ever full. If somebody wants a website for free, or they want this because they're thinking, oh, all these people want to build their portfolios, that time has come and gone. So even within our organization, if we know somebody has a skill and we go to them and say, hey, we totally want you to step all the way out of your role and take on all of this in addition to your regular work. And by the way, you're not going to get any extra recognition for this. It's just something we need done and we want you to do that. It's the same thing. We would not stand for that in an organization. So why would you allow that as part of your culture outside of that in your own business? So going back to people that help each other out is awesome. So how do we do that? One of the examples that this guy gave was awesome. Well, if you need a web designer, maybe you can pay just a little bit, but here's what's going to happen in advertising. Here's how it's going to be promoted. Offering to go with this web designer to 10 of the client meetings and talk about how great they are as part of the sales presentation. Being able to take this person to a networking event and introduce them to your entire network and say, yes, this is my web person. They helped me develop my website. I think you should know them. Those types of things have value, even though they're intangible, and they may be able to have a trade-off. But nothing is free. There's a give and there's a take, unless we're the founders. And even sometimes when we have equity, we may not have the willingness to just give with no return.
And sometimes it even crosses the line of being an employee, when that's where it becomes dangerous. From a liability standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, and even sometimes you're hurting the person when you pay them as a contractor.
What I would say you're just describing is a transparency issue. We think we're doing it for one reason, and we might actually need to know things we don't know on the other side of it. So how do we be transparent, and what does that look like? That doesn't mean telling all. That doesn't mean giving everything away for free. Whatever that means. Here's the value we're providing. We can see this is what people are able to contribute directly and indirectly to our bottom line. This is what our career path is based off of that, or this is what our pay structure is based off of that. In the world of education, that's a very clear path. I have this much education and this much experience, which means it puts me in this pay bracket. That's never a bad thing to have, because you're walking in knowing upfront what's possible and what's not possible. But also transparency of, if there's a big obstacle, how are we going to handle that? Are we going to go hush hush in the back room and pretend it never existed and just go, no worries, no worries? I mean, hello. All of us were kids, and we all had parents that did that to us one time or another. And the looks on their faces told it all, even though they wouldn't tell us anything. Transparency is important in terms of communication. Yeah, there's stuff going on. I'm not ready to tell you about that. Yeah, there's stuff going on. Until I have the complete picture, there's nothing to share. My job is to help you do your job best.
And you could be riding on the Titanic right when it hit the iceberg, and they're telling everybody, it's okay, relax, we're going to fix it. And all of a sudden, you're all dead.
We've got things like relationships and networks and who's got the influence. I know I've been in organizations where we jump in and everybody has this buy-in and we keep throwing money at it, and it's a money pit, and it's a money pit, and it's a money pit, and we do everything we can to keep throwing money at it, and we're invested in it. And then we've spent too much money, we're too big to fail, or we're too far along, we've got to come to the end. There are some skills that are involved here, and this might be the call to action for our audience today. Have you ever thought you were in so deep that there was no going back, but that there was nothing but more money and more investment and more resources going into it? The skill of thinking and planning ahead, what are the triggers that would consider us stopping this project? How far off base is so far off base we've missed the mark and need to go back to the drawing board? even if it's millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars that have been thrown into a project, sometimes the best thing to do is to stop, because your comment about the Titanic is what brought me back to that beginning of we're in so deep that we're too big to fail, if you will. And cars went through that, the automotive industry, banks have gone through that. I was in an industry in real estate where that became the case. Certain companies were too big to fail, and that phrase was thrown around. I find that interesting that in every industry, we could be too big to fail, and so we all throw money at it. But what happens? We're doing the same thing, the same way we were before, and so where's all that money going to go? Down the drain. So in an existing company, the concept of the organization, the established, and the startup culture, it's great to try new things, but it's also great to stop the projects. It happens all the time. Google has tons of programs that over the years I have become a part of and started to use, and then they're like, nope, we're done with this. And they just turn it off, and they give you notice, and off they go. There's something to be said for that. Yeah, it sucks to the people using it because they were invested in using it, but at the same point in time, it's actually better for the business because then the talent, the energy, the resources, the ideas aren't for nothing. They can be focused in another direction. Everybody, this is Program 22, Startup Culture in Established Businesses. Thank you for joining Tanya and I. You can find all the program notes at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com/P22, or you can go to the site and search Startup Culture in Established Businesses. Remember, I asked you earlier in the show, and this is the case, leaders, your actions matter. Have you ever been in a situation where, looking back, and it's all over now, that you were throwing good money after a bad idea and you just kept going and you were too far in that you couldn't turn back? What were the signs? What did you learn? How are you preventing that from happening next? Because that is going to be what we can take away here to build into the plan those little levers of, oh, we have a red flag, let's stop and look a little closer. You can establish a culture with every action and every word that you say, and you can do that in a way that attracts the talent you want and that has the elements of a startup culture that makes sense for your organization within your value system and your vision. You are bringing a startup culture into your established business. Until next time.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.